local dialects. So it's good to be out in this section of the woods. I'm, as Pam said, I'm from Transylvania County, and my ancestors settled in that area from both directions, from Charleston and also from Pennsylvania and down through that area. So we've got a lot of local connections. In fact, the courthouse in Rutherford, Columbus, was one of my distant relatives, a Clayton, on my mother's side. And the name out here, Suratt, is a derivation of my last name too. So there's some connections back through the genealogy of that. So much for that. We're talking about American chestnut and restoration of the chestnut today. I understand that y'all have a fairly large planting here of about 1,000 trees on this property.
No.
You don't?
No.
Okay.
They came in about 2.5 years ago, did about 103 plots, and they were doing it primarily in the bottoms because of the phytophthora.
Yes, sir.
They wanted to see, because they were
okay, all right.
Deal with that also. But it was done pretty helter-skelter. They came in, they didn't do any prep of the ground. They brought in really young, unhardy plants, planted them in areas that were poison ivy, honeysuckle, all this stuff, and walked away from them.
Okay. Well, so we'll have to talk.
We're trying to get more done in an organized fashion.
Okay.
But
what you're alluding to is the same problem that every volunteer organization has, is people and resources. It just takes a lot of work to do these things. Just like maintaining this property, it takes a lot of work and time and lots of money. So, but the American Chestnut Foundation is a national organization. We have, I think it's 15 state chapters, and we're in the Carolinas chapter here. That's North and South Carolina, and we meet together. The board is selected from citizens, you know, all volunteer, by the way, from both states. We have a number of research orchards and places, work going on in both states. In fact, the largest one I can think of in South Carolina right now is at Seneca. It's called Chestnut Run. His name is Dr. Joe James is running that, and he's doing research with phytophthora, and I can never.
yeah.
But anyhow, so I never know just where people are, you know, when I come and do one of these types of presentations. So just give you some brief history here. This is a picture of an existing chestnut tree. This is up in the state of Maine, I believe is where this one's about 95 feet tall, and it's, if I remember right, it's about 18 inches at diameter at breast height. It's standard 54 inches off the floor, off the ground, not the floor. How'd I turn this thing on?
It should be on, you just push the...
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, okay. Just again, a little bit of background history. The chestnuts were used a lot by the early people in this area, the Cherokee Indians, and I think there were Creek Indians in this area also. They depended on the chestnuts as a reliable source of food. Also, there's some documentation that says that when DeSoto came through, he came a lot of chestnuts as they made his travel through. They don't know the exact area he came through, but they think this is pretty close. And I'll go through some of this stuff fairly quickly. This was the original range of the American chestnut. It doesn't show, see center button for there. Okay, you can see it's there's spotty areas down here in the Piedmont and stuff. Since this map was drawn, we've found there's some evidence that supports that in the Piedmont areas there was a heavy chestnut also, but it died out in the 1800s. And the reason for that was this other pathogen in the soil called Phytophthora cinnamoni. We think that's the reason you don't see any in those lower lying areas through here is because of that. But these are you'll see the green is generally a little higher elevation, and Phytophthora doesn't cold winters and so forth. It likes a damp clay type soil where it just stays damp all the time. And there's a lot of clays in this area, for example. But there's a lot of areas where it doesn't exist. This is some of the traditional, the things that chestnut, the wildlife that depended on the chestnut. Of course, the wild turkey, bear, there's some grouse. There's a little connection to local history. You can see where the chestnut was used in these, here's one, Fort Mill, South Carolina, in Newfoundland. It was used in a lot of construction and so forth. In fact, I was just telling Susan, I believe it was, the old chapel at Walnut Creek College at Black Mountain, if you ever go by there, just go in that chapel because the whole interior is made out of American chestnut. And it was cut off the property there, so in the 30s when the chestnut was dying out. So they harvested it and they milled all the panels, raised panels, the pews, everything. And we just a couple of years back found out that when they did it, they made a spare set and they got it in storage. Yes, sir.
Question. A lot of the paneling we see is filled with wormholes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I guess what was that process? And when, I guess when, like in the 1700s when they cut down chestnut trees, did it have wormholes in it, or is that what came after the blight?
My understanding, it's a beetle, I forget the name of it, that actually prefers chestnut wood. After it's dead or on the ground, they'll get into it. But you can find chestnut, they call it green cut. In other words, it was green when they cut it. It was alive. That's clear, it doesn't have any wormholes. I've got some. I'm a woodworker also, so I make some furniture. So I don't have much of it. Most of it's very wormy. Even Chinese chestnut, when you saw it in the lumber, it'll get the worms holes in it too. There's lots of examples. These are just a few. There's houses on 221 going to Boone that you'll see that's got bark siding on them. A lot of those are chestnut bark. It's been on there for 100 years. It's got a real high content of tannic acid, so it's very rot resistant. And that was a preference. The reason they like to use it for post and any outside, thing. This leads to talking about fattening their hogs. There's trails that came up through what now is called the gorge, I-40. There's a drover's trail, and people in that part of Tennessee would drive their hogs to market into South Carolina, and they had these weigh stations along, and they timed it with the chestnut harvest so they could feed the hogs chestnuts as they came through, and it was really quite something. The Chestnut Foundation has pictures of train cars going north to Philadelphia, New York in the fall of the year. It looks like coal cars, but it's chestnuts. They're just rounded up with chestnuts. They were such prolific producers of nut, and they bloom late, so the late frost doesn't kill the flower, so they bear heavy usually every year once they start bearing. They're not like the oaks, for example. They generally bear heavy every 2 years, but the chestnuts are very reliable, and year. This is just a picture of when the blight struck. You can, it was just devastating that happened, and they couldn't stop it. But it's sadly so, they found that they would do things like cut whole swaths of trees trying to stop. They thought the pathogen was airborne, and it is airborne, but the other way you can get on your feet and carry it too. Oaks happened to be a good host for it, and so it was there. But what it did not allow was for any natural resistance to develop. So they just cut the trees down, and so American chestnuts, some chestnuts do have some small resistance, but for that to develop by natural means, you've got to have two trees that crossbreed that has some resistance. The offspring have more. So over a period of time, this happens. And I'll talk about that here in just a minute more. These are some examples of how the blight enters in. You can see right here how red that is, and that's called a canker. And what actually happens is it grows in the cambium area of the bark of the tree, and it cuts off nutrient flow. But it only grows on above ground growth, does not kill the roots. That's the reason you see sprouts growing back up. They'll grow back up, some will live to produce, they'll bear a few years, then the blight gets blown into the rust spot and starts growing again, it kills it, but they keep doing it. They've been doing it for 100 years now. So, this is a tree. You can see the burrs here out on the top. I don't know where this particular picture was taken, maybe off the Blue Ridge Parkway. Now, this is, I forgot that was on this slideshow. This is something, you can pass these around if you're interested in them. This explains how we use what we call a backbreeding process. In fact, here's a few more if y'all want to pass them around. What we do is to put this in the form of a picture to understand what happens. We start off with the Chinese and the American chestnut or other some resistant variety of chestnut, and assuming that the Chinese is highly resistant, which they are, because that's how the blight got introduced in the United States, is through actually Japanese chestnuts. So if you cross them, if you cross an American with a Chinese, the offspring is of course going to be half American and half Chinese, but it'll only have intermediate resistance, and that's the reason for the pink flower. So then we start a program, we breed this American back to, this offspring back to an American, and its offspring is 3/4. It still has moderate resistance. And we continue doing this, and we're up at 15/16, which is 94%, but it still only has a mild resistance to the pink color. And then we do what we call an intercross. We take two different lines of these 15/16, these BC3s, they call back cross, and we intercross those, so the offspring, which should have a lot of resistance. So the gene, this offspring will inherit resistance genes from both parents. This is what this tree here represents. It's a BC3, and it should have a lot of resistance, but it's a numbers game. If we knew how many resistance genes it takes to resist this blight, whatever that number is, if you figure out how many combinations that could be, it could be thousands and thousands. So one out of those thousands will be highly resistant. So that's the reason we're out there planting thousands and thousands of trees trying to find that one that does. But as a side note, there's other research going on. One of the places is Clemson, doing DNA research, so to identify the blight-resistant genes. Once that's done, we're going to make a major advantage, because that way we can go to all of our stock and determine whether it's resistant or not and get rid of what's not. So that's the reason we've got a lot of high hopes for that.
How old does a tree have to be before you can cross it?
Generally, it's 5 to 6 years per generation. They'll start. They'll put male flowers out, catkins, in a couple of years before they put out female flowers. Then it usually occurs, like I say, 5 to 6 years. But it's a hand pollination program. It's very slow and labor intensive.
And how long does it take before you know if the offspring is resistant?
It can be several years. We just have to put them out and see, and I'll talk about some of that here in just a minute. You can see this is the female flower, and this is the male flower with the cat. It's got the pollen on it. So what they actually do, you can see these bags. To pollinate this female flower, there's a certain time period of just a few days that it's receptive. So you have to go, and by hand they collect pollen, which is very labor intensive because that stuff's very small. And then they come back and they'll actually find the female flower, and they'll cut all the male flowers, the catkins, away from it and put a bag on it. And then when it's receptive, a few days later, they come back and they put the pollen in the bag and shake it, and it pollinates it. And
They're both on the same tree?
no.
The female and the male are not on the same tree?
No, there are, each tree has female and male flowers, but they do not self-fertilize. They're not, you have to get pollen from a different tree for a viable pollination.
So when I have a Chinese chestnut, an old Chinese chestnut, I recognize the male thing. I've never seen the female.
Do you have burrs on it? Does it produce?
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's another tree somewhere else that you're getting pollen from.
Well, that's why I
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Because, wow.
Yeah, they do not self-pollinate. There is a little bit of that, but not, it's very, very small amount. You can see this is where they're bagging the the female flowers. I might add, I didn't mention this, our major research orchards are up at Meadowview, Virginia, and there's hundreds of thousands of trees of different varieties, whatever. It's a large effort. There's about 6,000 volunteer or members of the Chestnut Foundation, too, to give you an idea of the size of it. And I do have a copy of the annual report if somebody wants to see it. And if you want to see it yourself, you can go on to acf.org, and all that information is available on the internet. So you can see here how they're collecting pollen, I believe is what this guy's doing. It's very labor intensive. You can see these orchard ladders are using lots of hours, and lots of crews go in and just spend weeks and weeks doing this kind of stuff. And then when they harvest it, as the thing says, they'll go and they actually harvest the burrs before the nuts open to keep the squirrels and everything from getting them before they do. And they've got a big facility at Meadowview that they collect. It's a big barn that they about fill up, because they're doing about 80,000 to 100,000 nuts every year now.
So how do they get the burrs open? Do you say
You use these real thick, heavy chemical gloves, because those spines will stick you, and they have a shucking contest, or not a contest, they actually shuck them open. But as they start to ripen, they'll start splitting so you can see where they're starting. Yes, sir.
When it says stored until the roots sprout, so the nuts are not put in soil immediately?
They are put in a mixture of peat moss.
Okay.
It's actually 10 parts peat moss, 1 part moisture, water, and they're stored in a refrigerator, and they have to be acclimated a minimum of 90 days before they'll germinate. And we get a very high germination rate, 90-some%.
But they don't germinate until you remove them from that and put them in soil?
Well, they will actually start putting out the root radical even in it over
The reason why I
winter.
ask is because we discovered, we knew that there had to be some here, but we discovered 2 chinkapins that were next to each other, and my understanding they're in the same family with the American chestnut.
Yes, they are.
Susceptible to type issues, and it was the first time I'd seen them flower and produce fruit. And the thing that was interesting was we read up on it, and it says you have to go out there and harvest those seeds immediately, because often the pod will open and the seeds will germinate sitting right there on that.
Chinky pins will do that.
And when we collected them, I would find some that had already started putting out a root system.
But they're good to eat.
Oh, so I gathered up a whole bunch of those, and I can't find anything that tells me detailed process. So I just used a Thafford potting soil mix.
Yes. Yeah.
And I planted them, and nothing happens and nothing happens. So, I mean, they were stored away. Okay.
You need to store them in a refrigerator.
Well, some of them said you need to get them in soil right. Anyway, I wound up with, now this spring, they're starting to come up out
Are
of
they?
this ground.
Okay.
And I've got 24 viable chickens, and I'm going to put them in a fenced area so that things can't browse them.
Yeah, deer like them. They like chestnut too. This young lady right here is Judy Sutton. She's up at the Cataloochee Ranch. It's over in Maggie Valley. I think y'all probably familiar with that. This is about 5,000 feet. It's one of our research orchards there that we're doing a lot of local adaptive breeding with it. And we've got some trees over there that are very, very promising. Now, you asked the question about the blight and how they are resisted, how the trees resist the blight. Well, the way we test that is we actually inoculate them with a blight, and that speeds up the testing time also. As you can see, this person right here, this is we actually we've got a 10 millimeter diameter plug. We plug the bark, pull it out. Then we've got on this petri dish, we've grown a medium of the blight, and then we take it out and we actually insert it in there, and then we tape it. And then we come back and check, see how it's radially it grows out. And then we at certain time intervals, we'll come back and measure these cankers. And if the tree has small cankers, that means it's got some resistance. So that's how we know they've survived. And I don't know who this handsome young man here is. It probably took me 5 minutes to get up from that position. But you can sort of see here, we come back 6 months and back and we record it. And again, it's just a lot of manual labor to do this. In the Carolinas chapter, our premier research orchards is at Edneyville, which would be northeast of Hendersonville. It's about a 2-acre site. It's fenced up, deer-proof fence and so forth. And we've got the last generation of trees that we're working with. When they start producing, they're 3 years old now. When they start producing, that's the nuts we'll use to try to reintroduce chestnuts, American chestnuts, to this part of the country that are regionally adapted to our trees that we found here.
You can expect to get nuts in about 8 years?
Probably another 3 to 4 years we'll start getting some. You can see here how the blight is, you can see where the tape was, it held it in place and how it spread. And we come back and like I say, we just look at those and we actually, one guy with a notepad and the other one look and you're measuring it. It's, again, it's a lot of work. This is our orchard at Edneyville. It's just on the backside of Chimney Rock State Park. Now, a little bit of, you can't see it, but just over to this side over here is the back part of Sugarloaf Mountain, I believe it's called. It's the back side of Chimney Rock. Supposedly that's where they call them the Over the Hill Gang. It was the soldiers that came in and shot the British at Kings Mountain. There's some caves and stuff. They evidently stayed there overnight when they came through there. If you ever read about the battle at Kings Mountain, it's awesome. 1,000 squirrel hunters came and shot those bloody British. And didn't get all of them. As you can see, this tree here has no resistance. It's dead. These are samples of seedlings that Phytophthora cinnamonius worked on. It's like it's very deadly. It just kills them.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
So it sounds like there are 2 pathogens.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just never got that.
Actually, the airborne, the pathogen, the blight, my understanding, there's about 8 varieties of it, mutations of it. Earlier I mentioned about Joe James' work at Seneca. He's testing for Phytophthora resistance, but they're combining that with tests for blight resistance, trying to get both. But our primary goal is to have a blight resistant tree because we can plant those in areas where Phytophthora does not exist. So that's Dr. Joe James right there. Not the dog, him. This is how he tests them. He's got these big horse watering tubs. He puts hundreds of them of nuts. He requires thousands of nuts every year for his test. He lets them sprout, and when they sprout, he douses them with the Phytophthora solution and see if any of them live. You can see a lot of them do not. He's at about 1,200 feet in elevation, I believe, there. Now, this is a tree here. These trees right here, this picture was taken by, the man, I forget his first name, his last name is Jeanette. And there's a Jeanette Lumber Company in Asheville run by his grandson or great-grandson. And he says, my grandpa took that picture. That is so neat. In Oregon, because it hasn't gone past Mississippi River yet. You cannot ship American chestnuts across the Mississippi as a ban for that very reason. And they don't have a lot. Oak is one of the primary hosts for the pathogen, and there's not, my understanding, not a lot of oaks west of in the western part of the states, U.S. You can see here, you mentioned chinky pins. They only have 1 nut per burr, and chestnuts will have 1 to 3. And by the way, I've got some samples here that y'all are welcome to look at, leaf samples of chinky pin, Chinese, American chestnut, and also some wood samples. And here's a few journals that y'all can take if you. Is that it? Yes, ma'am.
I know somebody that their relative has a chestnut farm in Oregon, and they ship chestnuts all around the country to eat.
Yeah, they grow them commercially.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's okay.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because they don't have the blight.
Right, it's that you can't ship the other way.
That is correct. Yes.
Gotcha.
And sort of related, the Dutch elm disease, I grew up in Connecticut, it's like chestnut. But then we were in Oregon just recently, and I noticed, little seeds on the ground that I had not seen since I was a little girl. The elm, so I guess the American elm still survives like the chestnut?
I've not studied American elm, but I think you're correct. Yeah.
I just was wondering, well, maybe they're still...
Yes, sir.
The blight, I guess the question, is there any reason why they couldn't do a weeding program only for Phytophthora and not worry about the blight so that it could be planted in the lowland areas? I mean, if we
Well,
have massive expanse.
Not really. The reason is because the blight is also there in the lowland areas. You've got both.
So after, I mean, if the American chestnut hasn't been in the bottoms for a hell of a long time.
Yeah, but the blight's there. It's on the, oh, yes. Yeah.
How does it survive if it doesn't have oaks?
Oak trees.
Oaks.
See, it survives on the oak trees. Yeah.
But it doesn't kill them.
No, it doesn't harm the oak trees.
I think you can advance that.
Yes, I got it. Okay. Now, this called A Journey Back in Time. West Salem, Wisconsin is where these pictures you're going to see. You look like you're familiar with that. Well, evidently back in the 1880s, 1890s, some settlers that settled in that area took some chestnuts with American chestnut, and they planted some. And as time goes on, they grew to several rather large stands. In fact, this stand here, if my memory is correct, it's about 60 acres. It's about 90% American chestnut. But the blight has arrived there, but not in a real virulent strain. So
they will not be affected by the blight?
yes, they are.
Oh, they are?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's nothing
Now,
that can be done?
well, I'm going to talk about that. This is just a map of where they're talking about places on this site where they're making studies. Well, it turns out there's some viruses in the soil that will attack this pathogen and give it the flu. It'll make it sick. So they have got these steady, but they can do that in that area because there's only about 2 different variations. Where here, I said earlier, there's about 6 or 8. It's a lot more, it's a lot stronger or virulent here. Well, they're able to do some studies and everything, and you can literally take a chestnut tree that's got a canker on it, and you can mud pack it with soil, and it'll recover. But that's hard to do on cankers,
Oh, that are
too high and that sort of thing. Well, from this, they've developed some hypervirulence that they're able to treat these trees with, and this to give you an idea, this is sort of the way it looked into this country. There's one that's died for some reason, or it's still living actually. Now that's getting to be a good sized chestnut tree. And these, of course, you can see this is, like I say, this area here was about 90% chestnut. Well, typically before, when the people settled the Appalachians, I think they said about 30% of the forest was chestnut. So it's a real mainstay species. You can see there more of them.
Why are they?
That's probably part of their study for the hypervirulent study. I actually haven't been to this site. I have bought some seed from them myself. That's Ron Myers. He's works for the North Carolina Forest Service, and he's one, or has been on the board of directors at Carolinas chapter. See, it'd be something else to go see these trees. So that's the end of that. Now, I've got another little, where did I put it? Oh, there it is. Now, can anyone guess how large these trees grew to, the size? Well, no, I'm talking about diameter.
Like some of the ones that used to be in Georgetown. Could be. Bigger.
Those are poplar trees.
Yeah, but as big as some of those.
You're talking about diameter,
Yes, ma'am.
5 feet.
5 feet. Well, I've got possession here of a tree. This was over in, are y'all familiar with Mills River in Henderson County? This was at the Miller Bottoms on Mills River. And this picture was taken around 1929 or 1930. I want you to just pass that around. Yeah, well, this tree here is, I'm gonna estimate, was about 8 feet in diameter. But it wasn't the largest one. And these guys are getting ready to cut this with that crosscut saw. The middle guy is Albert Leidy, and he was 19 years old at the time, and his son, Jim Leidy, gave me this picture. That was his dad.
This is classic.
Isn't that something else? That's awesome. Well, the largest tree found records, it was cut in 1900, Francis Cove near Waynesville, North Carolina, and it was 17 feet in diameter. You can't imagine. That's what, from here to that window close to it, the tree probably was 1,000 years old. I don't know. I just have no way. And we've gone back, or other members have gone back to see if they could find the stump, but they were unable to find the stump. I'm sure I've left out a lot of stuff, but anybody got any questions or anything, I'd be glad to try to answer.
Okay, so, off the sword a little bit, how do you get the seeds?
How do you get seeds?
When are they going to be reasonable enough that we can take a shot at them?
And planting one and having it survive.
I'd have to go on the internet to see. They have a little box you can click on about buying seed and so forth. You can't buy pure Americans, but they'll get the blight and they'll die. But however, they are finding a lot of existing chestnut trees that are fairly large, you know, some up around 2 feet in diameter that's survived.
Where would they be?
There are a bunch of them in Tennessee, all the way up into Maine.
So it's internet shopping.
Yeah. The largest one in North Carolina, if I remember right, it's in Wilkes County, and it's 18 inches or so. It's got the blight, but it's still surviving.
Does that mean it's somewhat resistant to the blight?
Yes, they'll have some resistance, yes.
But may or may not ultimately survive.
Probably won't.
Take longer to die.
Yeah, well, that's been our experience. I've got a number of the B3, F3s planted, and it's amazing. Some of them will die the first year. Then I've got some that are just really growing, you know, very healthy.
Are there any available commercially that we can just buy up?
No, not commercially. No, not yet. Another little tidbit of information, our back breeding method, the people that are trying to develop a woolly adelgid resistant hemlock is using our method. And evidently their turnover per generation with hemlocks is like 1 year or something. It's much quicker. So they're doing a cross with Chinese hemlock. And the Carolina hemlock has some resistance also, so they're doing some work with it also. I don't know if y'all realize there's two different hemlocks that exist here.
One has flat needles and the other has needles all the way around.
The Carolina has needles all the way around. The flat leaves are the Canadian or the eastern hemlocks.
And that's the one that's getting in the...
Yeah. Well, the Carolina are dying too from it, but not as quick. So that's another restoration effort.
So you're going to end on some good news, aren't you?
Well, we're making progress.
We won't see it in our lifetime, though.
Oh no, I won't see it. My granddaughter might, but you know, it's not a 20-year thing. It's probably several hundred years actually to see how. Now, but this DNA research that's going on, that could be a game changer, and they're putting a lot of money into it. In fact, the people at Clemson right now just got a $200,000 plus grant to do some of that research, and other universities are doing it also. And the Chestnut Foundation just hired this year a plant geneticist that's trying to bring all this information together. And I don't understand all that stuff. I'm trying to, but my mind works slow.
How about, so, can you talk a little bit more about what the progress Clemson has made? I mean, do you know about that?
No, I do not know where they are on that. The last issue of the Chestnut Journal has a article on the DNA work, but I honestly couldn't. I've read it one time. I'm gonna have to go back and read it about 10 more to try to get double helixes and all that kind of stuff situated. Now this young man over here, I forgot to introduce my cousin over here, Al Pingle. He lives in Columbus, and he's my able right-hand man that takes pictures. And he doesn't like people to know this, but he taught biology. But he won't speak any Latin to me. But he knows what I'm talking about when I do say something. Yes, ma'am.
That picture of the, was it 60 acres of the chestnuts that are in, is that Wisconsin?
West Salem, Wisconsin. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Oh,
And some have to play, are they going to allow them to just maybe?
oh no, they're actively working to find resistance through this hypervirulence program, and they are recovering. And by the way, I didn't say this, the reason those trees survived where they did because they were so far away from the natural range of this pathogen that killed all our chestnuts. It just took a long time for it to get there.
Right.
It eventually did after probably 100 years.
Well, I guess I'm just curious because you said if they hadn't chopped down all the chestnuts to begin with, maybe they could have developed their own resistance. I was
Yes.
just wondering if they were going to let that standard trees there and maybe see if it could develop.
There is some work, actually, they don't publicize much of it, at Meadowview, Virginia. They've got some pure American stands that they're doing just this same thing. It's natural selection.
Right.
And they're doing this very same thing. But again, it's a long-term program also. So if you ever get two that's got a lot of resistance, and their offspring will have a lot more. It'll have a double dose of it. And that'll be the one that actually goes back. See, we got other programs that we're working toward. We've got a group that's working on cloning. So if we ever identify which trees that are highly resistant, then we can clone them and we can put thousands and thousands of them out. But to reintroduce them into their natural range, my understanding, the pollen flow or windage, the distance, you got to have a tree about every 100 feet or so. Is that right, Al? Do you remember? For them to pollinate and reproduce. So there's lots of hundreds of feet between here and Maine. You know, so it's a big task. Yes, sir.
You said that you were testing for resistance by using contaminated plugs and putting in.
Yes.
If you didn't do that, how many years would it take for you to be able to determine whether it was?
I don't know that I could answer that in how long, but we have trees that we just plant and leave. And in fact, I just visited some last Friday a week ago at DuPont State Forest that has been out for 4 or 5 years, and they're up 25 or 30 feet. And we did not inoculate those, but they're starting to show some signs of the blight already. There's some beautiful trees there. I mean, they're big and just straight, good, healthy trees. So to answer your question, no, I can't really say, but eventually they will get it. Because every one we've ever found out in the wild does have blight or have cankers on it.
And yet, has there been any research into developing some sort of antidote for these?
There's some stuff that you can spray, but it's such a huge, overwhelming task to do that. You know, you could take care of a small number of trees, but you can't take care of thousands or millions of trees. So that's the reason we're trying to get a tree to where it'll naturally resistant on its own. Is there anything I missed? Well, I thank y'all for inviting me to come in. I hope you wasn't disappointed. I love to talk about chestnuts. I don't do this on a routine basis. We have I work with I think some of you probably met Tom Saley. He's our regional science director for this area. He's got an overwhelming job. He's got several states he covers. And some of the efforts that he's doing too is in his testing. If you're familiar with Bent Creek Experimental Station near Asheville, they're allowing us to use some of their greenhouses to grow chestnuts and so forth, seedlings there that will be coming out this fall. So one of the things that we're trying to do too is trying to go and talk to younger groups, because chances are they're going to live longer than we are, you know, so we want to get that interest up. And here just a few weeks back we was at Vard Middle School to have a conservation day, and we were allowed to go. And they didn't call it Earth Day, but it was during that same time. So what we did there is we took a bunch of seed and let the students plant the seed in pots, and now we've got them over at Bent Creek growing in the greenhouse, and hopefully this fall we're going to be able to go back to the school and say, hey, this is what you planted in the spring, and you know it's that big or whatever. So DuPont State Forest has got several plantings. The one of them we visited last Friday, whenever it was, we just planted 250 there, and it looks like all of those lived. So far. But again, getting back to where what won't, we started with planting B3 F3s, and they were mostly in U.S. forest, North Carolina forest, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of those out there. That's been out there for nearly 10 years, and they're doing quite well. So we'll know maybe at some point in time. If there's no other questions, I thank you for your time, and I appreciate you allowing me to come. Thank you.